The new season is here! Pre-season testing is over, and it is now time for the first race of the 2026 Formula 1 season, and it is the Australian Grand Prix, which means that it is time for my preview and predictions. This is a series where I will be previewing, and then at the end of the video, giving out my early predictions for the Grand Prix. Yep, it is the start of the F1 season, and it is starting at Melbourne, Australia, which for long-term F1 fans just feels right. And it is the first race of the brand new era with new power units and new aerodynamics. And the Melbourne circuit is going to be one of the toughest tests for these new power unit regulations. From pre-season testing, we learned that management of the new ERS system is going to be a giant headache for the teams and drivers. And that was at Bahrain, a circuit which features a lot of heavy braking zones and a lot of zones for the drivers to harvest energy. The Albert Park circuit in Australia, though, is completely different to Bahrain. This graph shows basically when the drivers were either at full throttle, medium throttle, braking, or just lifting from qualifying in 2025, with the obvious exception of Las Vegas, which was wet during qualifying, so FP3 was used. And what does this graph show? Well, what it shows is that the Australian Grand Prix has the third largest amount of time spent at full throttle, with only Jeddah and Monza having more time at full throttle. When it comes to braking zones as well, Australia has one of the least amount of time spent on the brakes. Australia has 71.5% of the lap at full throttle, with 10.4% spent braking, whereas Bahrain only had 59.5% of the lap at full throttle, with over 17% of the lap braking, which is a massive difference. So what does this mean for the Australian Grand Prix? Well, what it means is that during the race, the teams and drivers are going to find it even harder to harvest energy than they did in Bahrain. And what does this mean? It likely means we're going to see even more lift and coast, and probably a lot more energy clipping, and this is probably going to dominate the opening round of the season. Which team can get the energy management right? It is going to be so critical in Australia and for the first few races of this season. And when you look at the layout of the Australian Grand Prix, you can see why energy management is going to be such a big issue and the main talking point. The only heavy braking zones are really turn 3 and turn 11. This is going to be a huge test for Honda, especially after the disastrous pre-season testing that they had. They really struggled to recover energy, meaning that Australia is going to be an even bigger challenge for them. For the first race of the season, Pirelli are going aggressive with the tyre selection as well, as they are bringing the softest tyres in the range, meaning that the C3 is the hard tyre, the C4 is the medium tyre, and the C5 is the soft compound of tyre. Last year's Grand Prix was a rain-affected race, and the drivers spent the majority of the race on the intermediate tyres, but in total, there was 35 pit stops. Last year, the pole position lap time was a 1:15.0, and that was set by Lando Norris in the McLaren. During that pole position lap, Lando Norris reached a top speed of 329 km per hour, which is 204 miles per hour. In the Grand Prix itself, the race fastest lap was set by Lando Norris as well, and Lando set a time of a 1:22.167. In this year's Grand Prix, I definitely think that the pole lap will be quite a bit slower than what we saw last season, and that is pretty much down to the nature of the circuit with these brand new cars. That being said, I expect that the top speed will probably be quite a bit higher than what we saw last year, and that's going to really be down to just these new power units as well, having a lot more energy usage during qualifying. I just want to say, if you're enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. I have also started a channel membership which you can join. This will just help support me and also the channel as we start the brand new season. It starts at just £3 a month. If you want to do that, click the join button below and get started. I would really appreciate it. But now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about the midfield teams. For the midfield then, the Australian Grand Prix is going to be a very interesting weekend, as we are going to get a much better look into who is looking good and who is not looking so good. We already know Aston Martin and Cadillac are going to be taking up the back of the grid, but ahead it is looking pretty close between Haas, Williams and Alpine, as they are all looking pretty close. Haas had a very impressive test, clocking up a lot of laps, and generally looked very good. However, if the rumour is true and that Ferrari power is not quite as efficient as Mercedes when it comes to energy deployment, then Australia will not be as strong for Haas. Williams' test showed that they are maybe looking a little bit weaker than they were last year, whereas Alpine are potentially looking like they are in a great place. Provided, of course, they can get the laps done, because we did see Alpine spend a lot of time in the garage with power unit related issues. If Alpine can get on top of that, then they could be looking very strong in Australia. Audi is going to be pretty interesting as well, as we are going to finally see just how good their first ever F1 power unit is. It's going to be a big question mark because, well, testing is one thing, but a Grand Prix weekend is something completely different. For Ferrari then, they are heading to Australia looking like they are in a great place after a very strong test. Charles Leclerc set the fastest time of the test on the C4 tyre and also set the fastest time on the C3 tyre. Not only that, but Lewis Hamilton had a much better second test in Bahrain compared to what we had initially seen from him. We had seen him have a lot of spins and a lot of off-track moments, but it really started to come together towards the end, and Ferrari are now heading into Australia with a lot of confidence. Not only this, but we saw Ferrari innovating, which is a very scary thought based on what we have seen from them in the past. But they introduced the inverted rear wing on day 2 of the second test. Now, we didn't see much running from it, and it was only out for a few laps, but there is rumours that it made the car very fast in a straight line, as it dumped a lot of drag. Now, I don't think we're going to see it again for a while, but if they do run it, it's going to be very, very interesting. The reason I don't think they're going to run it for a little bit though is because I do think there will be some reliability concerns. There's a reason it only did 5 or 6 laps. But it is positive from Ferrari that they are innovating and being on the front foot. From the tests, the rumours were that Ferrari didn't manage energy quite as well as Mercedes, and we have seen that this is an energy-hungry track due to the amount of full throttle. So if it's true, then victory could be pretty difficult. But given the unreliability potential of the Mercedes, it's certainly not out of the question that they could win. The other big benefit for Ferrari is that they are running a smaller turbo than their rivals, and this smaller turbo seems to be helping them get the car off the line. So if they are on the front row in P2 or P1, or even on the second row, they could have a massive advantage going into turn 1, and honestly it might not even matter if they're in P3 or P4. They could be leading by the first corner if they get that start right, because it looks like for them, they are finding it easier than their rivals to get the perfect start. For Red Bull then, they are heading to Australia, I imagine feeling pretty good. The power unit is definitely a good power unit, and the energy drinks company has designed a better unit than manufacturers Audi and Honda, which is a very good thing for the Red Bull brand. The car looks great as you would expect from Red Bull. Max Verstappen showed a great turn of pace. The only concern for Red Bull is that they did less laps than Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren over the course of the 2 tests in Bahrain. Isaac Hadjar only set the 15th fastest lap as well, but I don't think alarm bells should be ringing for him yet, like we saw with pretty much everyone else who came before him. He did have a lot of reliability issues, which was not exactly his fault. I do think Red Bull are probably the 4th fastest team at the moment, but they still have a lot of learning to do when it comes to being a power unit supplier, as does Ford, as it has been quite a long time since Ford powered an F1 team. That being said, I do think Max Verstappen has a better understanding of these power units than a lot of the other drivers, and this is really going to help Max in the Grand Prix. So, to be honest, even if Red Bull are the fourth fastest team, I still expect Max Verstappen to be somewhere near the podium because, well, he's Max Verstappen. For Mercedes then, they are heading to Australia probably feeling very, very confident in the pace of their car. They had a very solid test when the car was running. Both Kimi Antonelli and George Russell both seemed very happy with it, and we saw that their race runs were very, very strong. Not only that, but over one lap, they were very close to Ferrari when both laps were on the same C3 tyre. However, we did see them have quite a few reliability-related issues. They took out 2 power units during the Bahrain test and had to run a third one, which is not really a great sign. If they can fix any reliability-related gremlins, then I'm pretty confident that this is the overall best package heading into Australia. Hopefully, Kimi Antonelli doesn't have some reliability-related issues, as he seemed to always have in the Bahrain test, but we shall see. And finally, for McLaren then, they are the world champions, and they are heading to Australia as probably the 3rd fastest team overall, but they are still very, very close to Ferrari and Mercedes. Honestly, it could go from week to week with these teams as to who is fastest. Also, it has to be mentioned that there is a rumour that McLaren, Williams and Alpine were running a slightly older spec of Mercedes power unit compared to the main Mercedes team. However, in Australia, they will all have the same version of that power unit, so that could instantly unlock some more performance. There is also a rumour that McLaren is slightly overweight currently, so if that is the case, I am sure they will find some ways to reduce some weight and gain some free performance. One of the biggest concerns for McLaren though has to be getting that car off the line. We saw that they struggled more than many when it came to getting a good launch. When the car is running though, it has to be said, they looked very, very solid. And like I said, I may have them as the 3rd fastest team at the moment, but it is still very, very close, and there's no reason to say why they wouldn't be 2nd or 1st fastest if they get the weekend right. Like I said, between the top 3 teams, it's looking very, very close. So with that in mind then, what are my early predictions for the Australian Grand Prix? Well, in the midfield, I think that the top midfield team and midfield driver will be Alpine and Pierre Gasly, as I do think Haas might have a bit of a tougher weekend in Australia if the rumours are true about Ferrari's deployment issues not being as good as the Mercedes deployment issues. Also, I'm kind of hoping there that the Alpine can actually get through the Grand Prix without breaking down, but we shall see. But what about pole position then for the Australian Grand Prix? Well, screw it, I'm going full delusional for pole position, as I'm going to go for Charles Leclerc to take the first pole position of the brand new era. Ferrari looked very, very fast, and Charles Leclerc looked very good behind the wheel, so I'm going to go with him to take pole position. But what about the top 5 in the Grand Prix? Well, in P5, I'm going to go for Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari. P4 will be Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. P3 will be Lando Norris in the McLaren. P2 will be Charles Leclerc in the other Ferrari. And I'm going to go for George Russell to win the opening round of the season. Oscar Piastri will probably finish in P6. And I have a feeling that's probably going to be because one McLaren car is going to struggle to get the car off the line. And I'm going to go with Oscar Piastri this weekend. As for Kimi Antonelli, unfortunately for him, I'm going with him having a DNF. I do just have a feeling one of the Mercedes cars isn't finishing the race, so I'm going to go with Antonelli. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, please remember to comment, leave a like and subscribe. And also, if you haven't already, remember to hit the join button and become a member of the Mr. Pulse channel. Thank you all so much for watching.